Okay, we're working here on the functional aspect today of the sculpture unit. And so I'm just going to go straight with the air dry clay that I requested that you pick up. Now, again, if you can't get a hold of this, you can use the recipe that I put online. It's a good recipe, but it typically doesn't have the same density as this clay does. I'm using some kind of older clay that I purchased at the beginning of the year. So mine dried out a little bit. I had to add a little bit of water to it and knead it to some degree. That's why all this stuff is on here. And that kind of helped me out a lot. So if your clay is a little dry, you can add water to it. Just make sure you don't add too much. But I'm going to go ahead and start with just a simple functional project like a cup. So I usually have somebody, I usually have a good variety of different projects that the kids can make, and I show them different examples. But the cup is a simple one. Usually I talk about ergonomics when it comes to functional works and like what's it good for, right? Unfortunately, this isn't the kind of clay that we can fire, but we can let it air dry completely and we can paint it. So what I like to do is I like to start with a sphere, and then I basically make a simple pinch pot. So I try to find the center of that sphere and I push in with my thumbs. And I turn and push and turn and push. The whole idea is to try to keep the wall thickness the same all the way around. So I'm not pushing too much onto the bottom. And once I get it to about like a bowl type shape like this, and you're gonna see it's gonna crack, that's normal. Don't freak out about it if this is the project you selected. But once you get it into that shape, you wanna kind of hold it in your hand like this. Pinch pots are kind of a common thing for kids from age 5 up. They can make them with their little fingers sometimes. You don't wanna give them too much clay because they'll poke into it. What I'm doing is I'm taking my thumb and I'm smoothing from the middle up the side. And I'm applying pressure from the outside as well by kind of holding it. And you can see it's getting really nice and smooth inside. So the more that I can do that now, the better off we'll be in the future. So I'm just going to squeeze it in the round like this, because I do have some areas that are thicker than other areas. So I'm trying to locate those by just working my thumb and my fingers around like so. And again, you can see it's continuing to crack, right? So I've got a pretty good bowl shape here, but I want to get this whole cup shape thing going on. So really my next step is to flatten off the bottom a little bit. So I kind of push it down and spin it in place. And then I want to try to pull the walls up a little bit. And again, I've kept it thick enough to where nothing's gonna collapse. So it's about the thickness of my pinky finger, maybe a little bit thicker. If you were using traditional clay, you'd want it between your thumb and your pinky finger. But this behaves much the same way. So when I'm happy with that, I'll flip it over. And I just like to gently pop the top of it down so that it's nice and straight. So once I'm happy with that, I'll kind of set that aside. I'm gonna pull out some more air dry clay here. You want to keep the lid on this stuff while you're working because it can dry out quite a bit. What I'm going to do is use kind of a variation on slab and coil methods of building. Again, traditional ways to make ceramic products, but we're doing this with air dry. It's cheaper, no kiln required, but it's not like food safe necessarily. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of knead this and squeeze it until I have a good kind of almost like Lego brick shape, is that what I always tell the kids, something like that. And then I'm going to pound that a little bit out just with the meat of my hand like this, pretty carefully. I don't like to do it all at once. I like to flip it often so that it kind of regularizes everything. And if you have a rolling pin, sometimes this helps. But you want to make sure, again, that you're not pressing too hard, that you're not trying to do it all at once necessarily. You want the same thickness for your slab as what you have for your cup, because we're going to use this to attach to this. So what I'm going to do now is grab some tools. I just use regular old kitchen tools because you can clean them up, but I want to cut this nice and straight. So it's nice and flat across the bottom. And then I'm going to come up and do the same thing here. I'm gonna go ahead and cut this nice and straight as well. Same with this, because I know it won't wrap all the way around, so it's gonna take definitely more than one of these for me to attach. So what I'll do is I'll fit it like roughly in that area there. I need to make another one about that size too. So you can take your leftover clay, add more to it. A little bit more there, I'm gonna knead it. Again, if it's too dry for you, just add a little water. My hands are really red. I was working outside yesterday in cold weather, trying to get some things cleaned up. Time for some lotion. And clay will dry your hands out really badly, especially if you're using regular clay. So again, I'm gonna flip it over. You notice how I have paper underneath, right? If you were using newspaper, some of the print would come off on your clay. Sometimes that's cool, sometimes you don't want it to happen. But you can always paint back over it once the thing's totally dry. And that looks like a pretty good thickness to me. So I'm gonna do just what I did before. I'm gonna cut that out. In fact, I might even take this over here and trace it, so I have the same shape and size going on. But the paper's a good idea because that way your clay doesn't stick to the surface. This clay will stick really badly to like a regular tabletop. But with this paper, some of the clay basically deposits onto the paper, and so it makes for an easier release. Looks like I need maybe one more right here, just to finish out the size and the height that I'm looking for. So I'm gonna come back to this clay. Looks like I just maybe will have enough to finish out a third slab on there. Of course, you can make these as tall as you want. It's up to you. Give yourself a couple of days though, from when you make it to when you want to paint it, because if you paint it right away, the moisture that's released from the clay itself is going to cause an issue with that. The paint may not stick very well. So I usually dry mine out as soon as I'm done building it, and then I give it a few days until it hardens. Give it a quick roll real quick. Kids seem to really love the tactile quality of clay. You know, Play-Doh is a very popular arts and crafts element because it's kind of this time-honored tradition, right? I mean, I remember playing with Play-Doh and thinking it was the best thing ever. But this air dry clay is essentially got super fine paper in it, which kind of holds up the matrix. It does shrink a little bit, so don't be surprised if your piece is a little smaller than when you first started. So I'm going to go ahead and check this first to see if I need to modify anything. And right now it looks like it's going to be able to fit together really well. So in order for me to actually attach this, I have to scratch and slip it. So it's just like regular clay, again, if you've had a ceramics experience in your life. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to lightly scratch the lip of this pinch pot that I made. I just want to scratch it enough to actually create some kind of a texture in there. You don't want to cut it so deeply that you actually cut the clay, but you've got to have some texture for these two pieces of clay to actually stick together. Water's not going to cut it. Slip by itself is not going to cut it, and you certainly can't just press them into each other and expect they'll stay. Scratching and slipping is a very common technique for ceramics. I'm going to do the same thing to the bottoms of each one of these just to get them prepared ahead of time. Any place I'm going to have two pieces of clay that need to be joined together, I've got to do this. And again, I'm trying to be careful not to mess up my slab at all, because sometimes when you add all this pressure to it, it'll misshape. It'll become a misshapen kind of slabby mess. That looks pretty good. Okay, so I'm gonna work on making some slip now, and we'll work on part 2.